April 2021. The nation limps on in its recovery from coronavirus as conflict grows about people refusing to leave lockdown. Prime Minister Piers Morgan today released a statement with Labour leader Lily Allen saying, "Look, we know it was scary, and for a while lockdown was the right thing to do, but a lot has changed in the last year. Not least the fact that all clothing shops are now only selling PPE. We've got loads of the stuff. In fact, it's fine. You can come out now. In fact, please do." But despite calls for a return to normal life, many people, it seems, don't want to change. "It's annoying, really," said one Gosport woman. "My husband was thrilled when it all started because it gave him time to watch TV and work in the garden, which are his twin loves. And now he doesn't want to change, and no amount of reasoning can change what he wants." In response, her husband commented, "That's because she's got her heart set on getting me out of the house, and no amount of pleading can change what she wants." This battle of wills was reflected on the world stage too, as the United States doubled down on its decision to refuse entry to Harry and Meghan after they were deported from Canada for uploading cheesy content onto their YouTube channel. President Swift commented on the decision, saying, "I feel like they've got their hearts set on making funny, cute videos, but they just can't do it." Guess that makes 3 of us. My name's Andy, that's all fake news, and you're watching Alverstoke Antiviral. Hello and welcome to Alverstoke Antiviral. Today we're going to be thinking about Deuteronomy and the heart. But before we do that, we have an interview. I'm joined here with Colin, and we have some special guests, don't we, Colin?
We do indeed, yes. Dragged kicking and screaming into the modern age, we have Brian and Anne Williams. Hello, Brian and Anne.
Hi, Colin.
Hi,
Andy.
there. Hello.
How are you?
Well, we're good. I'm good, thank you. Yeah. And how about you two? How are you coping with being isolated and only allowed out of the house once a day?
It's all right. It's all right. I mean, we got a bit of this virus, we think, about 4 weeks ago, and we sort of just stayed put in the house for 2 weeks, and that was pretty hard. But we think we're through that, and now we're doing what the government say about, walking once a day or getting out once a day. Yeah.
It's lovely, yeah. I mean, we're so near Stokes Bay, aren't we? We're very blessed.
Yeah.
And Stanley Park, so that is brilliant and lovely in this spring sunshine. Just, yeah. It's nice to have something like that. Sorry.
I've heard you've been, bumping into all sorts of people on your walks, and so we could...
No bumping allowed, actually.
Pardon?
No bumping.
No bumping allowed.
No. We don't bump.
No.
We stand at a distance and yell.
Yes.
No, that is so nice meeting, particularly church folk. And we've seen Helena and the children a few times. We saw Sue Jane yesterday, which was very exciting because I haven't seen her for ages.
Leslie Bowling yesterday.
Bowling, Jan and Blair. It goes on. Stokes Bay is obviously the place to walk. So,
And you've been reading a bit, haven't you? You've been reading, Brian, about the Civil War. Which Civil War have you been reading about? I was interested in that.
Cromwell, etc. That one.
Ah, that one. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'm finished reading it now. Yeah, I got about 2/3 the way through, and I think, I know what's going to happen in the end.
We know now everybody died eventually, didn't they?
Well, yeah, they do, don't they? Sorry. And I'm reading C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. That's that's really helpful. It's really good, interesting. And that's been good. Anne?
Oh, right. I think if we did have the virus, I think it kind of knocked us out a bit. So I found it quite difficult to concentrate. I love reading. So I've gone for a fellow called Gervais Finn, who was a schools inspector up in the Yorkshire Dales. And they're very light and very amusing, and that's easy. But also an autobiography. I picked it up at the Women's Conference recently. Patricia St. John, she wrote children's books, Tangled Secrets and Treasures of the Snow, which I've never read. But yeah, I've loved her autobiography and the kind of commitment. I mean, you know, she's going back a bit. I think she wrote in the 50s, her children's books. Yeah, commitment to the Lord, the way people have just served him so wholeheartedly. It's very challenging, but a fairly easy read, which is nice.
Yeah. Is your concentration back to normal now?
Yeah, pretty well, whatever that is.
I think it's probably about up to 75%, something like that. Depending if I can get a word in edgeways.
So higher than normal.
Oh, thank you for those words of encouragement, Colin. You always were an encourager.
And I've heard that part of your symptoms were that you lost your taste, which must have been quite frustrating.
It was very, very frustrating because things that we loved just tasted awful or just
bland.
were not, bland. So, we found a liberal sprinkling of garlic. Was very, very helpful. So we have garlic with everything, savoury, not sweet.
Especially on the breakfast cereals.
That's a lie.
That also keeps the vampires away, doesn't it? So that's
it's useful from that point of view.
We haven't seen any vampires, to be honest.
No.
So it works.
Except for now.
Yes, except the ones we're looking at the moment.
Reassuring words in this difficult time. We haven't seen any vampires. Glad to hear. I had visions of you possibly now binging on tasty foods, like, you know, eating mustard from a jar. Or,
not quite, but we are eating very well, I have to say.
And miracles, we did click and collect, and it worked.
Yes.
There we are. That was Monday.
We're feeling quite pleased with ourselves.
Who are you and what have you done? Who are you and what have you done with Brian and Anne?
That would be telling.
I'm glad you're, coming to grips with. I've never used click and collect really.
Well, I have to say we did have to turn to Tammy at one stage because we were messing it up dreadfully, and she gave us a lot of reassurance, and that was okay.
Jackie helped us too.
She did indeed.
Yeah. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Tammy.
Do they replace some of your things?
They gave us refunds, and we kept the stuff. Yes, there's one thing I can't eat, and so I let them know, and they simply refunded the £4 I paid for it, and I passed it on to someone else. I didn't charge the other person, I hasten to add. Yeah, we were impressed. I won't say the name of the shop because that would be advertising.
A shop.
A shop. Marvellous. And are you looking forward to the day when we come back together as a church and finally get to be in each other's company again?
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah.
You miss people. I mean, we've been talking more to our neighbours, just we do. It's the church fellowship, really. And emails are so good so far, and it's okay. It's okay now, but we're missing people.
And I think the sense of worshipping together, to be honest, just to sing together, it is just so uplifting. And I think. It's been great, the things that you've both done and you've put out, and we've really appreciated it. But to be there with a group of God's people, and you know that sometimes in a service, not every time, but sometimes, just a kind of stillness comes over, sometimes when someone is speaking, and you just get this sense the Lord is speaking to us as his people. And we really miss that. So, there we go, but it's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
But of course, it's sad because there are going to be some people who will be missing. 3 people are, I think, significant people who we will really, really miss. But they're with the Lord, and we're grateful for that.
And I think from my perspective, talking to a webcam, looking at a webcam, it's not very responsive, to be honest. It doesn't smile back at me. It doesn't look thoughtful. So that speaking on media like this just isn't the same. There's no interaction, and there is. I don't know if people are aware. There is a real sense in which you can speak better if people are really listening and in tune with you and watching you, and there is an interaction there that changes how you speak and what happens, and we miss that.
I think it's true. I think it works both ways. I think you sense when the speaker is kind of with you, and and we're very blessed. I think we're very blessed in our church.
Yes, and there might be ways in which some of the online stuff, which might have benefit for people who can't make it to church normally, could be continued from this era.
Absolutely.
Nonetheless, it's not quite church, and it's not. I don't think it can ever be quite church. Online stuff, I remember reading an article years ago about people going to virtual church, and it's a bit like a paradox, because church is the gathering, and you get something from the gathering. But we do.
Sorry.
Go on, Anne.
I just think how it's very difficult to express love for others, isn't it? But sometimes just to be sitting next to someone and just share a glance at something that's said or sung, so there's that shared fellowship. But no, I think that's really positive to go forward with some of this stuff for people who are stuck in their homes. I think if we can get something positive out of what's happening in the long run, then praise the Lord. Really.
Yeah. I just had a thought. Are we on gallery view, Colin? Because if so, if I turned this direction, does it look like I'm talking to you?
Talking to whom?
It does look like you're talking to me.
But now you're looking the wrong way. You're looking away. You need to look the other way.
Oh, wow. On my gallery view, I'm looking towards you. So I need to turn that way, do I?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Never
This is an
mind.
intelligent conversation. Brian and Anne, we're so glad you were able to join us. Thank you very much for coming on. I know people will be delighted that you are alive and kicking and out and about, and I'm sure people will be delighted to spot you on the seafront on your daily promenade.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks ever so
Yeah.
much.
Take care.
Take care, both
Bye-bye.
of you. Bye.
Bye. I think Brian was washing his hands there for a second.
Yeah.
So, Colin, Deuteronomy.
Yes.
Now, what comes to mind for you when we talk about Deuteronomy as a book of the Bible?
So what comes to mind is firstly that I think it's a much more personal and emotively written book compared to parts of Exodus, Leviticus and Numbers. And that is, I believe, because it's the transcript, if you like, of Moses' final words to the people in sort of 3 speeches. And so it's like a father speaking to his children, giving them God's instructions, warning them about what lies ahead, and encouraging them to give themselves wholeheartedly to the Lord who saved them out of Egypt. So, yeah, I think it's a warm book. I think it's the best of the first of those, almost the best of the 5. I think Genesis is great to read. And it finishes up with that great challenge, which struck me years and years ago, to choose between life or death. Sort of very polarized statements by Moses that continue right the way through the Bible, continuing particularly with Jesus. Which way will you go? Which gate will you go through? Will you choose life or death? Yeah, so great in that respect. What in that one of those respects? Yeah.
I think one of the big understandings that people have about Deuteronomy is that it's obviously Israel's covenant law code taught, and because people think it's a book of the law and it teaches law, and we get the 10 commandments in chapter 5 and the greatest commandment in chapter 6, love the Lord with all your heart, and many other laws, that people think it is a sort of sterile legal textbook, rather than what it is, which is this preaching of Moses, as you say, this quite dynamic, passionate preaching of Moses to the Israelites about their relationship with God and the law covenant, which determines their relationship with God. And We saw last time with Numbers precisely why Deuteronomy had to be composed in the first place, because Israel's generation was lost in the wilderness, weren't they, Colin? And that creates a problem.
Yeah. I mean, they got into a real dead end situation in all sorts of ways. In all the older generation of military age, 18 plus, is it, or 20? Anyway, it doesn't matter. They'd all died, apart from Joshua and Caleb, and so you've got an audience of children who, some of whom would have no memory really of coming out of Egypt, or little memory unless what they'd heard, and some teenagers, of course, who would be in their 50s by now, but listening afresh to what really had been said before at Sinai, and they're hearing it all again in a very emotional setting, really. But the past is behind them and the future is ahead, and they're on the crux of the two. Crux in history.
Yes, and they're at that moment where they need to decide. This is the generation that won't remember most of the Exodus. They won't remember Sinai. They were children at the time, if that. And are they going to remember the lessons that God has taught them about who He is, and are they going to know how they are to live as His people? And that's the real question of Deuteronomy. And this is the most famous passage in Deuteronomy, probably. This is Deuteronomy 6, which Jesus quotes. And just to give you a flavor, it says, "These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me," Moses, "to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all His decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you." And just there in verse 3, you can see the promises to Abraham. You can see the increase, the idea that I will make you into a great nation, that blessing of descendants, and the blessing of a land. I go to the land I will show you. Those blessings promised to Abraham are going to be delivered to Israel. But it's conditional, isn't it? And it's conditional, it's contingent on whether they obey God's law. And what does it mean to obey God's law? "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength. And these commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts." And I wanted to highlight that key word, heart, because I think that's the word people miss when they read Deuteronomy. And we open this and we think it's a bit like the school rule book and just a load of sterile laws designed to teach people to behave a certain way. But it goes deeper than outward behavior, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What God wants is a people who love Him with all their hearts. Why? Because the Lord, their God, the Lord is one. And that's a statement not just that He is numerically one, He is the one and only, but He is the greatest, the best, the one. He is the one God who is above all others, and therefore He deserves 100% of His people's love. He deserves their hearts, their souls, their strength. He deserves all of them. He monopolizes them because He is this unique God, not just another God among many among the nations. He is the one. And therefore this commandment is to be on their hearts. And so what Deuteronomy calls for is heart change, a change in the heart. And we see this in Deuteronomy 10 as well. Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you? Fear the Lord your God. That's attitudinal. Walking in obedience to Him, loving Him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, to observe the Lord's commands and decrees that I'm giving you today for your own good. Some laws which very clearly have moral contours that carry across and are applied to us in the New Testament. Others which are unique to them in Israel's situation at their stage of salvation history and the role they are to play. And many which have a ceremonial aspect that prepare us for the work of Jesus. But they are to observe these commands. And the reasoning is set out. To the Lord your God belong the heavens, even the highest heavens, the earth and everything in it. Yet the Lord set His affection on your ancestors and loved them and chose you, their descendants, above all nations, as it is today. He's blessed this people. He's drawn them into covenant relationship with him. Therefore, circumcise your hearts. Circumcise your hearts. And do not be stiff-necked any longer. The book of Deuteronomy is a call for a circumcised heart. And we were talking earlier about what that means, Colin, and how it's a slightly unusual phrase.
It is an unusual phrase. I remember circumcision coming up with a youth group that we were taking. I think it was 11 to 14-year-olds. And they asked me what it meant. What is it to circumcise? And I had to tell them. But here it's been used about hearts. So it is about, has an element of cutting and making clean your hearts, purifying yourself from the things that contaminate it, but most of all, directing your heart wholeheartedly to a trust in the Lord God, who is the God who has saved them. And that's an emphasis of Deuteronomy, that the things they are told to do and the attitudes they have come about from having a new heart, and their heart needs to be devoted to the Lord so that their lives are then shaped by that, just as we're told the same in the New Testament, that because of salvation in Jesus, if we love him, we will reveal that in our lives as well by obedience to Jesus's commands. Yeah.
Yes, it certainly does carry a cost of the Christian, and we read that in the light of the gospel. For Israel, though, they're in a slightly unique situation, and this is my abominably simplistic diagram of Deuteronomy, because one of the tensions in the book is that you see in how the book is structured in roughly 3 big speeches. You see a tension between the fact that Israel are called in the law to have this circumcised heart, a heart devoted to God in love, and yet that is surrounded and embedded with narratives that point to their failure to do that. So the book starts with 4 chapters where Moses retells a story of how they've come through the wilderness. He retells what happened in Numbers. He retells about their failure and their rejection of God. There were even narratives of failure in this blue bit in the middle about the golden calf. And they are pointing to the fact that Israel have not had this attitude to God. There's a point where Moses actually says to them, you have been disobedient ever since I've met you, basically, words to that effect. You've been rubbish spiritually since the beginning. And the book ends actually with predictions of failure, and God saying to Moses, you're about to die, you need to write down this law, you need to realize that these people are going to become corrupt and they are going to break this covenant, and this is going to act as a testimony against them. And they are even given a song to sing in 32, Song of Moses, which predicts their disobedience. And so they are to sing about their future disobedience because it's a reminder that they are going to fail. And there are covenant curses, 27 and 28. The covenant curses that if they don't obey God's law and they don't live with a circumcised heart, then they will suffer the curses of God's judgment. They will not enjoy the blessing. And that explains so much of the rest of the Bible. It explains, so this Deuteronomy, where it leaves us at the capstone of those first 5 books, known as the Pentateuch, which set out the law they're known as, the Torah, that gives rise to the history books, often called the writing prophets, because there you have the story of Israel's history and about how on some generations they obey the covenant to some extent, on most generations they don't, and eventually they spiral down into exile and suffer the covenant curses of Deuteronomy because they don't keep God's law and they don't have a circumcised heart. And it explains the prophets, because the prophets end up sitting looking at the effects of exile and the effects of sin, and people like Jeremiah point forward to a day when actually God will circumcise their hearts and there'll be a new covenant because God is going to write his law on their hearts. And the great tension of the Old Testament is they're called to be these people who are devoted to God and love him, but they actually can't. They can't on their own strength, and they can't without God. And we see this in Deuteronomy 30. There's a hint actually not only that Israel are going to fail, that's taken for granted, but actually there's a promise in Deuteronomy 30 that after Israel's exile, the Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and all your soul and live. So Deuteronomy points away from Israel as the answer to their problem. It commands them to have circumcised hearts, and it says, be these people, have these circumcised hearts. But actually, it's also aware that they're not going to be able to do that, and they need God. They need God to give them new hearts. And that's such an important application, Colin, in setting up for the gospel, isn't it?
Very much so, yeah. And it's something that the hearers of Jesus didn't really get. You need to be born again was speaking about the need for a new heart. And Jesus told off Nicodemus, wasn't it? Told him off for not understanding this as one of Israel's teachers. He should have realized all along our inadequacy, inability to please God with the heart that we have, and that we need a new one. We need a work of God in our lives to transform our motivation and love, to direct it towards him. And Deuteronomy informed a lot of what Jesus said, from his temptation in the desert, even through to John that we looked at before the close down, about if you love me, you will obey my commands. Again, it's about heart. But Jesus probably understood, well, not probably, understood Deuteronomy very well. Yeah, didn't see it. Should be left alone and forgotten.
Yes. And it also prepares us in the sense that it doesn't just lead us to sit around waiting for God to give us a new heart and then we kind of obey the law and earn God's blessing. But actually in Christ, what we have is someone who keeps the law for us, who is our righteousness. Philippians will say we have a righteousness that's not our own that comes from the law, but comes from Christ, his righteousness and his sacrifice for sin. Because what does he suffer on the cross? He's cursed as anyone who's hung on the tree, Deuteronomy will say, because Jesus on the cross suffers the covenant curse of Deuteronomy. He suffers the curse, the fate of the disobedient, so that the disobedient can be treated with the blessings that he deserves. And it's all part of the gospel, isn't it? That there are different aspects to this. He dies for our sins, yes, but he also keeps the law for us and becomes our righteousness. And by the Spirit, he changes us and he gives us new hearts so we can actually live out and be the people who he saved us to be. And that's such an application that we need to hear, I think, particularly in a time where the human heart is exposed. It's very exposed in stressful circumstances. When everything is easy, problems go under the surface. But when there's stress, people's hearts and attitudes are exposed. And I'm sure there are lots of people who are learning things about themselves and their own behavior and attitudes and what they want, and learning things about other people, maybe that they live with, maybe that they come across. And it's all about the heart. What can change the heart? Can you change your own heart? Is there forgiveness for having a hard heart? And is there hope of actual change? Maybe people are stuck in sin and need to and know they need to change and know they want to have a circumcised heart, but they can't change and they keep failing. And the Deuteronomy will point us towards God and his Spirit's work to circumcise our hearts and forgive us through Jesus. In the same way, I think it will point forward to those who we know who we would love to come to know God, who don't know him, and we just think that person will never change. They'll never stop sin. They'll never turn around. They'll never be softened to God and the things of God. And actually, Deuteronomy says God can change hearts. He can change stubborn people. He can circumcise the heart. And the proof of that is you and me, Colin, isn't he? Because, look at us. Look at Christians. Look at what we're like.
Yeah. And we still need hard work being done, don't we? Because we get diverted and put our trust in other people or other things in the daily circumstances of life. Yeah. It's an ongoing work as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And isn't it a miracle of grace that God has actually changed us and changed many other people? And you look at Christians and think, oh, they're just naturally nice people. No, we're not. We're not.
No.
If we knew each other as we know ourselves, and we know the depths of our hearts, and we know what we're like, and we're honest, we know our hearts are unclean by ourselves and very, very anti-God and turned in on self-love and disordered love and love for other things and idols and all sorts of stuff we want. And it's only by God's mercy and his work that we're not as bad as we could be. And it's only by his mercy and his Spirit's work that we actually have life and forgiveness. And there's actually any change in us whatsoever. And it's not down to us, is it? It's not down to our good efforts.
A miracle of God's kindness, which they had experienced in the past. And they look forward to the future. And we need to be people who have that dual perspective, just like Deuteronomy gives us.
Absolutely. Just as a closing thought, I have put the past failures and grace and the future failures and grace here, because Deuteronomy does point to God's future grace, not only in the fact that he will circumcise their hearts, but also in the fact that there's more hope at the end of Deuteronomy than I had remembered, actually.
Right.
There's glimmers of it. Even the Song of Moses, which is mostly about their sin, ends with the hope of God making atonement for his people and his land.
Yeah.
And at the end of the book, Moses blesses the tribes of Israel like they're blessed at the end of Genesis with Jacob. And it ends with this sort of slightly uplifting vision of God. So this is 33:29, and it says, "Blessed are you, Israel, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord. He is your shield and helper and your glorious sword. Your enemies will cower before you, so you will tread on the heights." And there's this idea that God is great. He's their shield and helper, and they can look to him, and they should have hope in him to actually save them and help them, even when faced with the problem of the human heart. Yeah.
So worth reading, folks.
Worth reading Deuteronomy, and you can send us all your questions. And we will try to
You can
answer
send
them.
Andy all your questions.
Thanks, Colin.
Yeah.
Yes.
No,
Well, I
please
think that's
do.
about all we have time for today.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for watching. Tune in for the Sunday stream, and until next time, stay close to Jesus.
And wash your hands.